Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is having an outstanding Wednesday here in mid December, getting ready for their holidays. We're super excited about you joining us today. We have an incredible presentation by a couple of fairly well-known speakers. Most of you have probably worked with them in some capacity, and if not, you'll get to hear them today and understand why I say such a thing. So, if Tark, if you want to go ahead and pull up the presentation for us. And we will get going here. But let me do some introductions while Tarek's working on that. The first one, obviously, is Tarek Rahman. Tarek has been delivering technical solutions to customers on the platform since 2012, so 10 years now. He's currently focused on ITOM, so that's IT operations management, and asset management, along with configuration management, which we're going to talk about today. Tarek is also a certified trainer and has been teaching the ITOM classes for ServiceNow to the public roster since 2018. Again, most of our clients have had Tarek in one way, shape, or another, and have really enjoyed his work. The other presenter today is Doc Burnham. Doc is over 30 years experience with ITAM and also its associated aspects. He takes ITAM from academics and strategy through pragmatic day-to-day operations. He has supported thousands of ITAM implementations and enhancements, and obviously brings tons of value to our clients and their ITAM needs. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tarek, who will run through the agenda and then get into the presentation. We will have a couple of rules here. We ask that you ask questions by chat, and we'll certainly get to as many as we can, if not all. Also would like for you all to understand that at the end of this, we really want this to be a stepping stone to speaking with us further about your needs. So our agenda is pretty simple. We're going to go through some of the definitions of the things I mentioned earlier. We're going to talk about CMDB asset, project versus operational. We're going to talk about some operational roles, configuration management, ITOM, as well as asset management. And then we're going to talk about resourcing guidelines, and then finally, organizational structure. It's a whole lot of topic, and we're going to try our best to get through these, all of these, and hopefully Tarek's ready with us now. Tarek, you ready to go?
Testing, testing. Can you hear me?
Awesome, we can.
Okay.
Perfect. So if you want to jump into that slide number 4, we're ready for you.
All right, thanks. Yeah, that's weird. Always switching between these tools tends to be a little challenge sometimes. All right, so actually I think I was on before, and I'm not sure how it got out of sync, but anyway, let's let's move on. So we're going to review some definitions today, really discussing some differences between projects and day-to-day operations. Then we'll get into the main content where we're going to cover resourcing. And that's what we're going to be spending a lot of time on, is discussing the difference, again, between operational and project resourcing when it comes to assets and configuration management projects. And then we'll, one of the things I'll say is my background is primarily technical, but I've really been involved on the pre-sale side as well as on the delivery side. And I've seen on numerous occasions, especially during the annual budgeting cycle, right? A lot of times people come to us and say, hey, we want to implement discovery. We want to implement the CMDB. We want to stand up a CMDB. We want to do asset. But really, they don't understand a lot of what goes on, what's needed to, once a project is done, take it and run with it. And that's what we're trying to cover today, is to get you to help you understand what those needs might be. If you are considering such a project, now that you know, okay, well, we need to make sure we're ready to take the reins once the project is done. So we're going to cover some of the details, as you can see here on the slide. And many of our folks have spent decades essentially in this industry advising organizations on how to staff, right? Doc, I'm sure, has a lot of this experience, and along with many of our other advisory resources, and we will be happy to help if you have questions about these things. So key is, if any of this turns on a light bulb for you, get back to us and let us help. All right. So, but before we jump into the actual stuff here that we're going to talk about, the resourcing and roles and so on, let's first take a look. We want to just level set on a few definitions, right? So again, I think most people are up to speed on this, but still, let's just cover it one more time. So your IT organization uses lots of different systems, really, in order to deliver services that you then provide to the rest of the organization. And the practice of managing the systems that deliver these services is called configuration management. And with that, we have what we call the configuration management database, or we call it the CMDB. It's used to store configuration item records, such as hardware and software, throughout their life cycle, and maintain relationships between them. When we talk about the CMDB and configuration items stored in the CMDB, we need to understand that we're really not talking just about devices and device information. There's so many different data points and relationships to represent in today's CMDB. ServiceNow's IT operations management tools allow for population of that data into the CMDB on a consistent and reliable basis. So you don't have to have people going in there and manually keying things in. So that's where ITOM kind of fits into the picture. And again, any questions you have, please feel free to reach out to your CDW account rep, and we'll be happy to get back to you with some guidance and information. So with that, this is just a quick overview of configuration management. I just want to pass over to Doc now for asset management.
On the slide here, you can see, a lot of things in there, but asset management's one of those areas that touch all aspects of the company from it. It's covering all of the infrastructure and processes necessary to maintain the complete life cycle of these assets, whatever the assets are. And in a lot of cases, we're going to have hardware assets that you're used to for IT, the computers, the routers, the switches, the cables, the keyboards. You're going to have software assets also. Everyone knows when we deal with software, but you also have got perpetual type licenses and SaaS type licenses that go along with this for subscriptions. Then we've got, the cloud environment. We're all going to the cloud for a lot of things. How do we manage it? Both hardware and software resources coming into it so we can do that. And then you can see the one for at the end there, it says enterprise asset management. Those are all of the things that are non-IT assets more in general. Those are furniture, fixtures, specialty equipment, whether they're manufacturing, hospitals, it's vehicles, it's all of those type of different assets out there that we want to track. But the main functionality of asset management, 3 things if you can remember for them. You want to identify what do you own. That's going to be that is the asset repository. Identify what is deployed. That's where it comes in from the CMDB, the operational side, what's out there in the environment. And then what is being used. Again, just because it's deployed doesn't mean it's being used. So that's what we're looking at from an asset management. So we've got resources to help us understand what do we own, what do we have deployed, and what are we using. And then we get the data from those other sources, ITOM, CMDB, the procurement side of it. So it is all encompassing, and we all work together on this because no one thing can get it. Tark, let's do that first poll question here.
Sure. All right, so we have a poll question out here. Have you completed your implementation of ServiceNow asset or configuration management? We have a few answers on here, and I'll ask Kara to pull up the poll there, please, or present to our guests.
So what we're looking for is where are you at in the environment? Because we use the terms, and you will hear that, people banty those terms about a lot, but that way we want to know, have you got asset management installed? Have you got configuration management? And that's what we're trying to find out here.
All right, so we'll just put maybe about a minute on here and just give folks some time to look at that, right, and provide the answers. So a lot of times we find many organizations, they implement, let's say, ITSM first, and then they come in with configuration management. or they come in with asset and configuration management, or some different combination. And so we're just curious as to what combination have you implemented, or maybe you're planning to implement. So let's see what you have here. Just a little bit of okay, the poll has ended. All right, and maybe you can show the results as well. Is that possible?
And one of the things that, like I said, we're looking for when we get this one here is the term asset. A lot of times when people say they're managing their assets, they're talking about the configuration side of things, the CMDB. So now we've got the poll results just come in.
So it looks like quite a few of you have not actually implemented configuration or asset. So that's good. That means you may be able to learn a little bit about what we're talking about. So that's good. And then maybe some of you have asset, and a lot of you have config implemented. And there's quite a few of you actually who already have both implemented. And then we have a significant amount of other. So that's pretty cool. All right, anything else you wanted to cover here, Doc?
No, and this one here, we've got the next question that's going to come up. So then I'll have some more to add into it based on the next question here. So I know there's another question coming up for it.
All right, and then this is almost like a follow-up question, right? So if you have deployed, then have you been successfully maintaining the system to continue to obtain the value you expected? And we have 4 answers, right? So if you've implemented, but you completely went sideways and haven't been able to really obtain that value that you expected. That's the first one. We've run into that every so often. More typically, I think B is what we run into. We're managing, but lots of items fall through. And then we have a number of organizations who,
We see a lot of them where they implement a small aspect of it and then they're rolling it out to other parts of the organization. So, which is one of the big things that we like on there. So they're under control and then they can roll it out. Now, unfortunately, we see number 1, we have, or I should say A, it's off track. Usually that means we've implemented it under a project. You've put it in there, it's out there, and then they go, look, it should magically work. They forget about the resourcing that has to maintain these after it's implemented. And that's showing up in the polls right there. I see the results just popped up there. But that's one of the issues that we come out there. When we put these in, or we see organizations who put them in, they forget and they don't have all of the additional resources online to make sure that they can maintain this. Even though there's a lot of automation in there, someone still needs to maintain it. And that's what we're going to talk about in some of the additional slides coming up. Who maintains it? What roles are there? Because we need that data coming in. So it's trustworthy data. So you can get that data to manage the system by.
And looks like the results are in. And quite a few folks are almost half, I think, you're managing, but lots of items are falling through. So that's kind of what we expect. That's generally in the industry what we've run into. And there's at least 5% off track. So yeah, that does happen, unfortunately. And if you are running into that sort of scenario, then it's a time for lessons learned and kind of go back to the source, right? So anything else on here, Doc, you want to mention?
Nope, I'm good for right now.
All righty. So let's move on. And so let's take a look at the typical configure and asset management project. So we know that there are many reasons for us to do things within projects versus operational, right? Meaning you have an operational team who comes in and every single day they have a set amount of responsibilities, and that's what they do. That's their role, right? That's within their permanent role with the organization. But why do we want to do anything within a project? And that's what we're going to take a look at on this slide, just briefly, and we'll see. So number one, with projects, you get large amounts of work done quickly. Why? Because a lot of times you're bringing in outside resources, you get more funding, etc. You have specific scopes, right? Deliverables, timeline, budget. And you can engage extra resources to help with heavy lifting and expertise. So if you don't have a high level of expertise in a specific area, let's say ITIL, right? Your organization wants to implement ITIL, and you don't have ITIL experts on staff, but for a project, for an implementation project, you can bring one on and have that person provide the value to help your organization, to guide your organization to implement ITIL, right? So that way you're able to kind of time box and scope that and get the benefit from it. Allow for transformational change when executed well. And that's the part that we've seen, right, where it's a little bit challenging sometimes. It's when executed well. So how do you really get all that you can from a project? And here's the thing that many people, I think, tend to forget is that projects end. So what do I mean by that? Well, at some point in time, yeah, especially for longer term projects, the project team is almost seen as, oh, you know, they're here, they're giving us this, but then we forget that they need to leave at some point, and we need to know where they're going to leave us, okay? And a lot of times, maybe when you're down in the weeds, maybe you're doing your day-to-day, we tend to miss these things, right? We tend to miss, okay, well, how do we do a successful handoff? Do we have what it takes to keep going beyond this project team? And so that's what we're trying to get to today. All right, so we're going to jump ahead a little bit, right? So we started to talk about projects, but now guess what? We're gonna assume the project is done, right? So congrats on completing your assets and CMDB project. So you've crossed something off your list. You're all, you know, you probably had a cake or something, and this burden of, oh geez, we need to get this done on time, on budget, etc. All of that is done. But now guess what? Now what? Right? Unfortunately, if you're here and you're asking this question, that's probably not good. That's a little bit of a risk identification right there. If you're asking, what do we do next after the project is done? That's probably not the best time. But you know, you have to make do with what you have. So hopefully, with this presentation, we're gonna cover some things that will help you to maybe predict and have the answers to that now what. Maybe not specific things, but really around resourcing and roles, and hopefully we get you that information. So with that, we want to begin with the end in mind. So many of you are familiar with Stephen Covey's second habit, begin with the end in mind, right? And so we could kind of apply that as well to initiatives as well, such as projects. And when we begin a project, it's usually a good idea to have an understanding of what we're trying to accomplish, an expectation, and being able to describe the organizational benefits we're trying to enable, the inefficiencies we're trying to remove. And so what we're going to show here are things that are specific to beginning with the end in mind. All right, so first of all, the operational teams and resources should be defined prior to the project start. This allows us to really have a plan in place, paint a picture of what this organization is going to look like and how data, how processes will flow through the organization as a result of these teams and resources being in place. Now, if you don't have this in place before the project start, well, that's a little bit risky, right? And this could potentially cause failure or lead to failure if too many other factors add up. And remember, just as a lesson here, right? I think many of you can relate to this, that remediation is always more expensive and time consuming than doing it right in the first place. So that's what we're trying to do here, beginning with the end in mind and making sure we have the pieces in place that are needed in order to help us achieve success.
And
So,
one of the things that we're looking at within here is asset management, ITOM, CMDB, those are programs. So there is not an end. It's evergreen. It keeps changing and you have to maintain it. And that's where, what is the operational team that's going to take this handoff from the project team to move forward? And in some cases, it's an organizational change in your organization that says these people need now to support these efforts in there. So that's what we're looking at in here, making sure that organizations have that in mind, because we never like to work with organizations to say, you've just put it in, how come it's not working? No one's maintaining it. So that's what we're going through and explaining some of these, the resources that we need to maintain it after the initial project is done.
Yep, that's a great point, Doc. So secondly, it's really not enough to have people identified for the roles. These people really should be engaged at the start or maybe even before the start of a project, so that, for example, when stakeholders are hashing out requirements for the CMDB, having the configuration manager and analysts in the conversations will allow them to understand why certain decisions were made, as well as to remember the context to aid in future decision making. So why was this done, and how can we tackle this new challenge based on the methodology, the process, and so that decision framework that we put in place during the project, now we can take advantage because we have that experience going forward. So especially from a technical perspective, many times the operational team is freshly trained and really fairly new to the space. So imagine someone who is running discovery, right? We're implementing discovery, we have a discovery project, and we identified someone as the discovery administrator. And typically that person is going to be trained either right before the project or maybe even during the project. And so that is a bit of a risk, right? You bring someone who's very green, very fresh into an already working system. And what you're going to have here is this person might get cold feet, might not know what to do, and there might just be confusion and inexperience. So when you have the operational resources, this discovery administrator, working hand in hand with your project team, maybe not every single thing, every single set of configuration that the project team is doing, but at least be involved in scrums and showbacks and maybe some of the testing as well. They get the handoff is easier and the risk of failure is significantly lower. So imagine how KT, knowledge transfer, is typically done, right? It's here you go. It's either a video or some amount of documentation, might be a live session or two, but at the end of the day, that's like a very static sort of delivery, right? If you have your operational people in the meetings engage with the project team prior to that, then the handoff is a lot easier and it's more live. It's smoother. They already may start taking on tasks even before the project is done. So that just adds to their experience. The next one here is to be sure that operational resources have the training and experience needed to succeed. And ideally, any specific training needed for that role should be completed prior to the project starting so that they can take that knowledge and actually begin to understand and relate to the subject matter being discussed. And in summary, you want to have your operational teams resources identified, prepared, and engaged during the project to help ensure that the handover from the project team is successful.
And a lot of times when we hand over from a project to the operational side, there's an enablement session. And that's where the operational team sees how things work. It's just not that they work, but they've actually got hands-on seeing how it works so they can ask some of those other questions within it. Because if they're not well versed in it, this is a time for them to get better acquainted with it and ask questions on how it's going to work. So then they can see it work through the process. And like Tark said, it's going to be a smoother handoff to say project done, now operational teams take over and maintain it.
Yep, excellent point, Doc. So now we're going to dive into roles, and we're going to focus first on the configuration management portion of it, along with the IT operations management. And then I'll hand off to Doc for ITAM, the IT asset. So as we talk about roles, just one thing here is our goal in this webinar is really to send a message that you need resources to ensure the proper care and feeding of your configuration and asset management systems within ServiceNow. So what we're going to cover, the roles we're going to cover in the next few slides, are really not aligned to any specific framework or guidance. So don't take them and use them as prescriptive, right? What we'd like you to use them for is more as a high-level indicator, asking yourselves, do we have these roles, or do we have some gaps that we need to fill before we take on this new project? All right, so moving on to the specific roles for CMDB or configuration management and ITOM. So what we're looking for here, and we have a number of these listed, right? We have the configuration management or CMDB practice owner. Then we have the configuration manager, and we have, and these last two roles, right? The configuration manager and CMDB administrator analyst, you can have one or more of these depending on the size of the organization. We'll take a further look at what these are, right? We'll have some role descriptions in the following slides, but just wanted to point that out. And then on the ITOM side, we're going to talk about the discovery administrator or manager, as ServiceNow puts it. And then we have the service mapping administrator and analyst. So with these ITOM roles, they tend to include a lot of technical experience needed, right? So you can't just go, for example, to the discovery course or class that ServiceNow teaches and say, I'm going to become a discovery administrator. That really does not give you the full picture. We'll talk more about that, but ITOM tends to be very technical, and there's a lot of background knowledge that you need to have as well as the ServiceNow technical knowledge. So in areas such as networking and server administration. Let's take a look at the descriptions of some of these roles. So the first one we're going to look at is configuration practice owner, and this person is really charged with that person is given the main responsibility of the entire practice. Policies, procedures, and the overall success of the practice reside within that role. So really, the buck stops there, right? This is the practice owner. Now, the config manager is more focused on day-to-day. So they might be monitoring the statistics, right? The dashboards, trying to make sure that we have the CI classes in place that we need for the organization to continue to operate. And do we need to add more in there? Do we need to add additional attributes? This person is typically also going to be working with other teams to get any requirements from those teams built into the CMDB and included. So that's the configuration manager. And then we have the analyst, right? That role is really tasked with executing on specific deliverables to maintain or increase the quality of the data. So yet they might also be looking at the dashboards, and they might already have playbooks that they need to use to work through to get rid of different errors or issues within the CMDB. But really their focus is purely operational at that level. Now, from a trading perspective, the practice owner and manager would benefit from, by understanding the configuration management practice itself, using some sort of an industry-wide framework, and obviously ITIL is out there. So them having some degree of understanding and experience within these areas would definitely be helpful. Now, going down between the manager and the analyst, this is where they should be very comfortable navigating the CMDB and configuration management tool sets within ServiceNow, being able to use the interfaces, using the dashboards, the reports to get what they need out of the CMDB. All right, now let's go on to the ITOM, the IT operations management roles. We're just going to look at two in detail, right? The discovery administrator and then the service mapping administrator and analyst. So the discovery administrator is really tasked with ensuring the discovery application runs successfully. And discovery is, many of you would probably know, it runs on a scheduled basis, and every time it runs, it goes out, hits a bunch of IP addresses, queries those devices, and returns that data into the CMDB. Now, that means it's kind of like a living, breathing system. And with that, it needs care and feeding. And that's the role of the discovery administrator, to take a look at the various dashboards, the error logs, etc., that might happen. So, 2 days ago, we were able to successfully discover this specific Windows server, but today it's giving an error. Why is that? Do we have a credential issue? Do we have, what's the issue there? Right. So the discovery administrator is that sort of person to go in and triage and troubleshoot and understand, well, why are we having this issue? Or maybe you have CIs that you expect to be in the CMDB, but they're not, right? So the CMDB analyst may come to the discovery administrator and say, hey, look, we're not seeing these CIs, right? And then the discovery administrator is going to go out there and try to troubleshoot why we're not seeing those. Now, the service mapping admin, this person has a role that's different from discovery. Now, service mapping itself is fairly similar from a technology perspective to discovery, but the focus is completely different. Right? Whereas discovery is all about trying to find everything within a specific IP range, the service mapping tool, on the other hand, is really laser focused on the specific services. So imagine you have a service deployed for maybe PeopleSoft. And with that service, you want to understand, well, what CIs belong to that service, right? So service mapping is very different. So with the discovery admin, from a training perspective, you want to make sure that that person has a very well-rounded background in IT. So networking, server administration, even cloud environments if you have cloud discovery going. All of these technologies are used, and the knowledge is used for the discovery application to deploy and maintain that application. So it's important that anyone who is taking on this role has that skill set and experience. Now, on the mapping side, personally, I don't think you need to have that much background, but you should have some experience from an application, either support or development perspective, right? Understanding how enterprise applications work, how they're administered, how they're deployed. That's a good background to have for a service mapping administrator, because really what you're going to be doing is you're going to be connecting the dots between one application and the other, all the way through from the entry point all the way through to the end of that service within your infrastructure. And so that understanding will be key for a mapping admin. Now I'll shift gears here and turn it over to Doc to focus on the asset management side.
We're just going to cover these roles here. And as you can see, they got the similar roles: process owner, managers, and analysts, and all that. Very similar to the CMDB side of it. Now, remember, when we're going through the definitions from these, they're brief definitions, but these are roles. So one person may fill multiple roles, or one role may be filled by multiple people in there. And it's common to have it broken out, especially in the asset side of it, based on platform or the environment. And I'll bring in that. So on this slide here, your next slide, you're going to see some brief descriptions of the roles. Process owner for asset management. Again, it is the owner of the process. So it defines and manages the overall process. So it's going to get you your governances, the reporting, work with, getting the sponsorship, how we're going to improve it, metrics, all of that type of stuff. Now, this is a single person. We want someone who owns this so they can work with it. This doesn't work good by committee. So this is the process. The same thing with the CMDB process owner. So the asset process owner has to work with the CMDB process owner, so they work together. Now, the asset manager or managers, these are handling the day-to-day activity of what's going on with it. So they're tracking the governance and adherence to the processes and the regulations, those type of things, or other governance related to asset management. So that way they can see if they are compliant or not. And they always work with the process owner to make sure if they need to make adjustments to the processes or some of the procedures. Now, in large organizations, it's common to see asset managers broken out by the environment or the platform. An example, when it comes to hardware, you're going to have the desktops, the servers, network gear. Those may be different asset managers. And then when it comes to software, we'll see software ones broken out a lot of times based on the main or the key manufacturer or publishers. Like you're handling Microsoft, this one's handling Adobe and IBM, because there's a lot of complexity to understand the licensing. So one person, you should have multiple people. One person can't understand all of the variances between there. Now, the asset analyst, those are the ones that actually, like I said, they're going to do day to day. They're maintaining the repository, making sure the data is coming into the repository. They're actually validating the accuracy and the completeness of that data, because we want good data to come in, so we've got trustworthy data. And that way we can see it. They're going to be working with the business areas a lot of times. If some data is not coming in the way they expected it, to work with them to get that data to come in, whether it's working with the ITOM team or discovery tools, bringing data in, getting access to a certain domain or a certain group of people, especially if you've got multiple units. We have to make sure we're collecting all the data that we needed for all the environment. And if we're not, why? And how do we account for that? And again, it's real common that you're going to have analysts focused on their main area that they're looking at by platform or environment. And every asset manager also does a role as an asset analyst, because they're doing the analysis as it goes along also. So that way they can work with those. But the main thing is, how do we get this data coming in? Is it systematically bringing in? And we try to use automation as much as we can to bring the data in systematically. So that way we can get better accuracy and completeness on there. Now, the next slides here are going to be coming up here, and it's saying some guidelines. How many people does it take to perform these roles based on organizations? Go ahead and switch to the next slide.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And this one here, Tark's going to explain a little bit about this one, and then I'll jump in here and another slide here.
Yep. Yeah. So thanks. So some of you might be wondering if you need to hire a ton of folks for these roles, and as Doc kind of alluded, the answer is it depends. So many times we see organizations that are smaller, and they have, let's say, a little bit of extra bandwidth here. You could probably squeeze one or two of these roles in to that organization. But if your organization is larger, and especially if you're in a heavily regulated industry, so healthcare, government, especially military, you're going to see the need for actually hiring people for many of these types of roles. And so on the screen here, we're looking at, for example, the configuration practice owner. For a large organization, you almost probably want to have someone who's almost dedicated to this area. This person is responsible for the entire configuration management practice, and so that person has a good bit on that person's plate. The configuration manager, on the other hand, it depends, right? And same thing with the analyst. You may have a need for a full-time person to do it, right? Or maybe either through automation and good processes, maybe you can have it on the smaller side. So it all depends, right? But the point here, and really the takeaway for this slide and this area of our presentation, is really that make sure you don't underestimate the amount of work or the level of effort that it's going to take to operate your CMDB or asset system. All right. And we'll take a look now at the ITOM side. Now, these specific figures, these actually come directly from ServiceNow. So they have a document called the ITOM Product Skills and Training Guidance document. And we've kind of summarized the roles in here. And that's why you're seeing some of the other ITOM roles, such as event orchestration and cloud provisioning and governance. But if you don't have those, that's fine. Just ignore those and look at discovery and mapping, whichever ones you're looking to implement. But really, again, just to give you some idea of what it will take to administer the system. So if you are planning, right, we know a number of you are planning to implement discovery or CMDB in the future. Take a look at what these, these cons look like and understand what that future, the future load is going to be on your organization. So I'll take it away for Doc on the asset side. If you have anything to add here, Doc.
Yeah, so again, like Tark says, it's always depends on this. A process owner is a single named person for it. Now, that person will be working with the overall processes, how it's supposed to work for asset management. That's why it's key on there. That way we can work with that. That also works with the CMDB side of it there, also to how to maintain. Now, asset analyst and the managers, again, it's going to be variable because if it's a small organization versus a large organization, because it is real common to see asset managers broken out and the analysts broken out by the platform or the environment. That way they can do those. Now, the other roles that we get in here, it's depending on your organization. I did a study a while back and it broke down asset management, how many people were doing asset management. And the only thing that we found out for sure was, oh, there is no cookie cutter asset management team because they vary on what they're going to do. Some of these other roles, like I said, where we assist. Some companies have the contract manager, vendor manager, and procurement and buyers part of the asset management team because they're IT assets. Most times those are in, the procurement organization. So we have those, but we rely a lot on the contracts, the vendors, and actually the procurement side to support asset management. So we're going to need those people that we have to work with because that's how we buy the assets out there or acquire them. And just like we have to work with the CMDB and ITOM, is how do we get that discovered data coming in to make sure it's accurate? So again, these numbers are just a guideline for it. And it's real common to see, 3 people, 2 to minimum of 2. And it usually goes up to about 5 people from an asset management perspective on a lot of the organizations that we see. And that holds true here for the process owner. Then we got the managers and the analysts, and then obviously the assisted roles wherever they're at. So I think we've got another poll question coming up.
Yep. And just before we get there, I just wanted to talk about these numbers, right? So we mentioned small, medium, and large. And just to give you an idea, small is typically below about 1,000 employees. Medium goes up to about 5,000, and large is anything larger than that, right? So 1,000 small, up to 5,000 mid, and then large is anything over 5,000. So yep, let's jump to the full question here. And so question is, do you have these roles on your team, right? So if you've implemented config or asset, we went through a number of roles. Do you have roles such as those on your team, or maybe close to that, right? So let's see. So nope, right? Or some, and most, and all, and then we have an NA if you did not deploy asset or configuration.
And
so
remember, you may see some of these roles, especially in large organizations where you're a conglomerate, you may have different teams for each of those companies. So you may see those out there also. And then as we're waiting for the results, some of the things, like I said, we're seeing roles and they're making sure they're defined roles and they know what they're supposed to do. What are the processes that they're dealing with? And of those, these are the operational side. project roles, deliver the project out there. And that way there's a smooth transition, is what you're looking for, over to the operational roles, because that's the organizational, change that the organization has to go to support these, from an ongoing, effort.
Okay, looks like we've got the results, and it looks like 54% of our attendees have at least some of these roles, which is good. Some have none, right, of those who have implemented config and asset, and some 2% actually have all of the roles, which is pretty impressive. And then there's some folks having most. So okay, yep, that's again kind of the bell curve, I guess we sort of expect. But thank you for participating in these polls. And this is our final slide here, really on the takeaways before the Q&A. And as Doc alluded to, really we want to make sure that if you are planning this sort of project, make sure you plan in advance. Do you have the roles and responsibilities already defined? Do you have the processes in place? Right? Maybe that might be part of the project, right? But you have to have an understanding of what the inputs are and what the outputs will be, right? The project should essentially be responsible for defining everything in the middle, but the inputs and outputs, you kind of want to have some expectation of what that's going to look like. And then the operational resources, again, should be available at the start of the project. If they're not available there because they're on PTO, those roles haven't been defined, whatever, right? That's a little bit of a risk because that makes it more difficult to hand over at the end. And then finally, especially with technical resources, they need to also be engaged, not just available, but also engaged with the project team to ensure that handoff is as smooth as possible. All right, so the next, that's pretty much it for our session. And we get into the questions and answers portion of the webinar.
Now I've got one question here, Tarek and Doc. Do you often see CMDB administrator analysis separate from platform administrator, or do you see those roles overlapping?
So I would say, yeah, I would actually say those are different roles, right? Now, again, it depends on the size of the organization and the competencies of the folks who are there. So it's possible you could start with one person, right? But as the organization grows or as your system becomes more complex, you may want to start looking at splitting those roles. And Doc, if you have anything else, go right ahead. Sorry about that.
I just say that from the platform side of it, they're managing the complete platform of ServiceNow most times. So they're going to do other things other than CMDB. Now, CMDB is the foundational side of it. So usually that is someone who focuses on CMDB because how it affects all the different other areas that they're touching versus just the platform to make sure that everything is in the platform that you're looking for, from procurement to asset to HR to all of those. So those are usually two different roles that we see out there, two different people doing them, but there will be some overlap because obviously we want CMDB to work, and so does the platform owner want to make sure that they've got the correct licensing and all the modules active out there for it.
Similar question, asset. Do you see asset and config roles combined? And if you do, are there downsides and also things you should watch out for if you do decide to go that path?
We do see a lot of these being combined, especially in smaller organizations, because they're used to asset management, the complete life cycle of it, which the CMDB is the operational side of it. So we're seeing those combined with it. Now, the one thing that we have to make sure of is there's two different objectives between asset management and CMDB. So the CMDB side is operational. What's coming in? Are we getting incident, problem, and change? The asset side doesn't really care about incident, problem, and change and those. They're caring about the complete life cycle. So we're seeing some of them are combined. Where we see more combined is at the process owner, where it's the same process owner, because these two have to work hand in hand. So that way the process owner can turn around and say, I'm responsible for asset and CMDB. How do we put these all together?
Awesome. Another question for you. Do most customers use a single source of CI discovery across the enterprise, or do firms use a multi-platform discovery model with service graph connectors or integrations to ServiceNow CMDB?
I can take that. I mean, the one thing that you want to know about the ServiceNow platform is that it's made for multiple sources, right? It's not just made for discovery. If you think, well, if we go away from discovery, this is not the right thing, or if we want to supplement discovery, right? It's what does it take to get the right data into the system. ServiceNow doesn't care how you get CI data into the CMDB. So if you're familiar with what we call the identification and reconciliation framework, that is an engine that ServiceNow builds in there to basically allow you to take all these multiple sources of data, process them, and make sure that they're not conflicting. So if you have discovery, great. If you want to supplement that with service graph connectors or integrations, great. Just make sure that everything goes through that framework. How do you know it goes through the framework? Well, service graph connectors by default, they are built to use the framework. Discovery obviously is built to do it. Anything by ServiceNow is built to use that framework. What you have to be concerned about is anytime someone says, hey, just give me tell me how to integrate with ServiceNow, and I'll push my data into ServiceNow. That you have to be careful of. There's a right way to do it, and there's a bad way to do it. Okay, there is a fairly involved technical way, but you can look that up or check with us, and we'll help you. We'll point you in the right direction.
And one
Excellent.
of the things with
Go ahead,
that,
Doc.
like I said, multiple tools coming in, it's depending on who's going to use it. Because if the security team is going to use it, they're looking for more security type data coming in. If it's the asset management team, they're looking for other ones. So like Tark said, we use that IRE to make sure we're talking about the same CI out there. It doesn't mean that we can't add the additional fields to put that data in. And inside ServiceNow, there's data precedence. So we want the best data for those fields. So we can put that within, it can be configured to put that in. And it's not uncommon for us to see, 5 to 10 tools bringing discovery data in. It's just what tool brings in which data and what data is it there.
Got it. I'm going to push forward a little bit here. I have another question. How will you identify if the right relationships have been built between the CIs?
Well, that's an interesting one. Well, with your configuration management, right? It's all about your services and being able to understand what CIs are being used to deliver those services. So if the relationships don't necessarily play a part there, then maybe you have too much data in there. And if you can't visually understand how these services are being deployed, what relationships are critical to these services, then you might need to add some relationships in there. By default, ServiceNow Discovery gives you a lot of data, and I don't necessarily recommend that you play with it. So yes, there might be some extra relationships that you may not necessarily use, but again, it comes as part of the package. So do you want to restrict the visualization, or do you want to kind of take what's out of the box? There are many parameters that you have to consider, but typically the critical ones are what are used in your application service maps. Those are the critical relationships to have, because those actually impact your dependencies. And if, for example, you are using change, or you have event management pushing alerts into the system, your application service maps with those dependency relationships, that gives you that those need to be accurate for those dependencies to work properly.
Okay, awesome. We do not have time to answer any more questions, but I will say this, we have a perfect segue into my call to action. And that is this question about compared to, and I'm going to paraphrase, but compared to ITAM is expensive and sometimes hard to get a business case approved. Do you have any suggestions on how to show a return on investment and value in implementing ITAM? Absolutely, we do. That's what we do every day. We happen to be very good at that. Great segue into the call to action. Reach out to your CDW ATAE or your ServiceNow Solutions AE and have them get you on the books here and schedule a meeting to learn more about specifically about how we can do that. We can even invite Doc or Tarek to the meeting. So again, reach out to those folks. Make sure you schedule a meeting and we can go deeper into some of these questions. So thank you all for your time today. It's been great. This has been recorded. It will be sent out to you as a participant. So thank you all for joining. Thanks for the great questions. Tarek, Doc, thank you for everything. Kara in the background, thanks for putting this on. Everybody have a very enjoyable holiday. We'll talk to you next year.